All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Firearms Friday, and so there are several states. Most notably, this morning we'll be talking about Washington and Colorado, who are attempting to ban the use of 3D printers for printing guns. And I shouldn't have to tell you this, but yeah. Um, Sergeant Major says, "Good morning, Steve. Chris may not do a show today. We are waiting." Well, good morning, Sergeant Major. Chris is doing a show. Here I am. So the idea of the government stopping the use of your privately owned 3D printer from printing firearms. Whew, there's a lot here. Okay, so let's talk about what the new laws actually cover. Um, so we're basically looking at Washington State House Bill 2320 and House Bill 2321, which okay, I'll share the GPT summary with you guys. It's easier. We're not going to try to read the full text of the bill. Liberty Doll did a pretty good coverage on this where she read through the full text of the bill, but that would take forever and is boring. So here's the summary. Washington State Bill 2320 and House Bill 2321 ban on using 3D printers and related files. The bill would prohibit the private use of 3D printers and CNC machines to manufacture firearms or firearm parts that are illegal or already restricted under state law. Prohibit possession of digital instruction files and or code that can be used to manufacture firearm components by private individuals, with criminal penalties for violation. Now, look, I want you to look at that line real quick. That prohibit possession of digital instruction files and or code that can be used to manufacture firearm components by private individuals. You'll note it doesn't say anything in there about the individual components being illegal or that you've printed illegal components. This basically says you can't own a book about guns. It also includes language that could criminalize broad classes of digital files related to firearm manufacture, not just the physical printing itself. Again, you can't own a book about guns. The bill prohibits the possession of digital instruction files and or code related to firearm components by private individuals. That's a problem. Okay? We'll get into the constitutional violations of these laws in just a minute. And I want to go through the summary of the individual bills first, and then we'll get to the particular constitutional concerns. But before I read any further, let me just reiterate this, make this very, very clear. My position on this has always been the same and has never changed. Every single elected official, without exception, who has ever put their name as a sponsor, a co-sponsor, or a signatory of any kind to any bill which is related in any way to the keeping and bearing of arms is a criminal, not by my personal opinion, but by the letter of the law, because holding that office is the holding of an office of high trust, entry into which includes the swearing of an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And the Second Amendment is not ambiguous. Shall not be infringed. And as I've pointed out many times, in fact, quite just a couple days ago, I was talking about how the First Amendment restricts the Congress from passing laws which abridge the freedom of speech, etc., etc. The Second Amendment makes no qualifier. It does not say the Congress shall make no law. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the founders used that language intentionally. They did not say the right shall not be abridged. They did not say the right shall not be truncated. They said infringed, as in nothing adjacent to this right shall exist in the law. It would be unconstitutional for the government to say, because every citizen has a right to keep and bear arms, we find that the right to universal firearms ownership is a human right, and so every gun owner should be provided, every citizen should be provided a firearm and a sufficient supply of ammunition for training, because keeping and bearing arms is a human right. That argument would be a violation of the Second Amendment, because that would be an infringement. That would be the creation of a law which is adjacent or related to your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Every politician who argues for gun laws of any kind is unfit for office. And if they are serving if they are already in office, like you got a politician who has never been elected and is on the trail pursuing election, and they use language that in any way relates to the control of firearms, they're unfit for office. If they have been elected and sworn the oath, they have committed a crime by breaking the oath which they swore, and they should immediately be removed from office and incarcerated. If I had my way, we would execute these criminals. Because make no mistake, when for there to be crime, there must be harm. A category of harm must be defined. A victim must be identified. The victim of gun control, of the crime of infringing on the Second Amendment, is every American citizen. And the extent of harm cannot be calculated. There is no greater war criminal on the planet responsible for more death and destruction than an anti-gun lobbyist, than anyone involved in the restriction of your Second Amendment freedoms. There is no greater war criminal. Not Genghis Khan, not Hitler, not Pol Pot. There is no greater war criminal than an opponent of your right to keep and bear arms. They are the most reprehensible things out there. I say war criminal in this case because what we're talking about is the conduct of war. We're talking about the right of the people to be prepared in the event that another entity chooses to engage in the conduct of war against them. So, the second one we're looking at, HB 2321, required blocking technology in 3D printers. The bill text available from the legislature makes it explicit. It would require any 3D printer sold or transferred in the state starting July 1st, 2027, to be equipped with software that screens and rejects files that can produce firearms or illegal firearms parts. Firearms blueprint detection algorithm means software that evaluates 3D printing files, STL files, CAD files, geometric code to determine whether they can be used to program the printer to produce a firearm or illegal firearm part. Printers must reject print jobs for such files and cannot allow users to override the blocking. Okay, here's the slippery slope one where we get into the questions of things like, okay, now hold on. Let's say, just for a moment, devil's advocate, that I could be persuaded to agree that 3D printers in private homes printing firearms is such a grave threat to safety that it warrants this violation, this invasion of privacy, this absolute rejection of the Fourth Amendment protection for you to be securing your person's properties and papers. And the law creates a carve-out which requires that manufacturers of 3D printers I think something fell down on the ground behind me. That requires that the manufacturer of 3D printers includes the installation of a piece of software that algorithmically identifies and prohibits the printing of certain material. You know, the first time I wanted to buy a 3D printer was when I saw a video where somebody had a broken knob on a very old stove. And the guy had called a repair guy who came out and said, it can't be fixed, the parts don't exist anymore. You have to buy a new stove. And so the homeowner said, okay, gotcha. And took one of the other knobs off of the stove, stuck it in a scanner, and then printed a copy of the knob and put it on the stove. Now, we're talking about a printer that costs several hundred or a few $1,000s. Printing a part that, if it were available, might have cost, $1, maybe $5, $10, next to nothing. But the part was not available. Homeboy printed it, and he didn't have to buy a new stove. Once we let them start putting software in the printer that prohibits the printing of anything, guns being a thing contained in the category of all things, what's to stop them from just adding additional items to that algorithm in the future? And I want you to think about this carefully. Think about it in this context. The 18th Amendment was necessary for the government to institute the Prohibition era, because the Constitution does not grant the authority to the government to do something like restricting the use, distribution, consumption, possession of a substance. All modern drug laws are unconstitutional. The law requiring a doctor to write you a prescription for certain for opiates, for antibiotics, etc. All drug laws, all substance control laws, all material control laws of that sort are unconstitutional. Such an authority is not referenced in the Constitution. And the Ninth Amendment explicitly states that just because a right is not explicitly enumerated within the Constitution does not presuppose the non-existence of that right. Now, hey, isn't that an argument for a woman's right to choose? No, because that would be an affirmative right and not a negative right. That would be granting an authority to someone, not recognizing a natural right. Okay. So, it took the 18th Amendment to create prohibition and the 21st Amendment to repeal it. But no such amendment was created in order to allow the federal government to control substances after it decided it had the authority based on the 18th Amendment precedent. And that is a problem. So, they go through the process of crafting law and invade your privacy, disable your machinery, and take from you what is a natural right. Yes, you have a natural right to manufacture firearms. And again, that is not my opinion. Right? We can look to the Bruin case, which says that any law which seeks to in any way countervene the Second Amendment must apply historical precedent to show that the United States has a history or tradition of applying law in this way. And quite simply, there is none. In fact, the history and precedent is precisely the opposite. We have a tradition in this country of manufacturing, maintaining, and improving our own firearms. It is somewhat less prevalent today for one reason and one reason only. Good, serviceable firearms, not the high-end stuff, just it is perfectly possible to buy a perfectly serviceable, reliable firearm for a reasonable price. In fact, for a price that is so reasonable that unless you have an interest personally in engaging in the work of doing the manufacturing, you just cannot make a gun that is better and cheaper than something you can buy at a gun show or a gun store or a pawn shop. Right? The little 357 Magnum that I wear on my hip every day, that was a $300 pistol I bought, 15 years ago, right? And I've put a lot of rounds through that pistol to make sure I know what I'm doing. I've cleaned it and put a lot of more rounds through it. I wear it every day. It's reliable. It just always works. It was $300 a decade and a half ago, right? I've been wearing that pistol almost as long as I've been married, with similar reliability, which is to say, flawless. There. So that is one major concern. Is as soon as they say that, how long is it before some big box company says, hey, Congress, we make this widget, and people stop buying our widget. Or we noticed a 3% dip in sales last quarter. We're going to need you to stop people from printing our widget. Okay, what if I needed a new adjustable wrench, and I looked at the cost of an adjustable wrench because China is doing something, and suddenly, an adjustable wrench like this one is 60, 70, 80 bucks. I'm like, I don't want to spend that much money on the adjustable wrench. You know what? I'll print one. In fact, the one I can print one so cheap that it doesn't even matter if it's as good as this one. As long as it gets the job done for a little while, I could throw it away or melt it down and print another one. How long will it be? How long will it take before? And let me remind you before the slippery slope takes us there, that less than 40 years ago, the argument was that what two people do in the privacy of their own bedroom is not your business. And a lot of us agreed with that. And I'm telling you right now, what I do with my printer is none of your damn business. In fact, I'll take it a step further than that, and I'll say what I do with my printer is protected under the First, Second, and Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. Now, when I say that, and Colorado's bill basically does the same. Legislation defines three-dimensional printing to include both additive layering and subtractive CNC manufacturing. So, okay, you've got additive and you've got subtractive. So, the additive printing, basically, you've got a bucket of goo or a thread of filament, and it goes through a printer head, and it just layers on and makes one layer at a time. It's like a dot matrix printer. It's just, instead of going straight down the page, it goes straight down and then backs up a hair and then goes again and makes the layers. And then the CNC, of course, you stick a block of material into the machine, and something akin to a miter head carves that piece of material, cuts the excess material away. So basically, you have additive printing is like painting, and CNC manufacturing is like sculpting, right? So it also prohibits the possession of digital instructions that may be used to program a three-dimensional printer or CNC machine to produce firearms or components in violation of state law. Okay. If it is a violation of your state's law for a civilian to manufacture a firearm of any kind, your state is operating. Your state is a rogue state. They're operating in clear violation of the Constitution. That is not a controversial statement. It's not up for debate. It is the fact of the matter. It's no different than if you're a sanctuary state, right? That's too late, Aaron. Show's almost over. Mike, it's too late for a mic check. Where were you 23 minutes ago, dude? So, all that said, First Amendment. Okay, let's get to the First Amendment. The First Amendment claim here. This is a First Amendment violation. I can make that assertion. I can say that code is speech. I can say that because it is a type of expression, that it is the same thing as speech, and therefore it should be protected by the First Amendment. But I don't have to. I don't have to say that, because Younger versus Daly, Sixth Circuit, 2000, holding in plain English, the Sixth Circuit recognizes that computer source code is an expressive medium. It can communicate ideas and information, so it's within the First Amendment's coverage, even if it's also functional. If a state bans distributing CAD/G-code files, then they are restricting expressive content and technical instruction, which is speech. Okay? Universal City Studios versus Corley. The holding says the Second Circuit treated computer code, DECSS, as speech covered by the First Amendment, but upheld restrictions under intermediate scrutiny because the law targeted the code's functional circumvention. So, that, again, the courts have explicitly, so now we've got Second Court, 2001, so just the following year. Courts have explicitly said code is speech and covered by the First Amendment. The state will try the functional conduct maneuver, and that's not complicated. CAD files are technical instructions. It's no different than a white paper. Okay. Now there is a more recent finding out of the Third Circuit, which is New Jersey. So bunch of commies. From this year, from February 12th. So this finding is just a little over a week, or a little under a week old. But they're holding, the Third Circuit said not all code is protected. Purely functional code with no expressive use may fall outside First Amendment coverage. But it affirmed dismissal largely because plaintiffs didn't plead enough facts about the file's expressive nature. It also found no standing on their Second Amendment claim on the allegations presented. So this is a relatively fresh appellate opinion, and it, somebody using this as an argument can just say, no, one court said that CAD files aren't automatically protected speech. And to that I say, Dred Scott. You know what? You're right. There is a court. There is a court that disagrees with me on that, on this question. There is a court that argues that the Second Amendment says something other than the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Yeah, fair play. There's a court that makes that argument. Courts can be wrong. There are courts that say men can be women. That's a brute fact. It is not a question in controversy. There is no legitimate argument that men can be women. Right? I mean, this court might as well say, we have decided as a court that circles are square, that squares are round, and that pie is not delicious. Okay, so you're wrong. That's what the appeals process is for, because activist judges will get on a bench and they will get it wrong. And likely what you're going to see in Washington, Colorado is that a bunch of activist politicians are going to get their law passed, and then when that law is challenged in activist courts, it will be upheld until it makes it to the Supreme Court, where Thomas and Alito are going to say, hold up, when in the history and tradition of the United States of America has it been reasonable to ban people from making firearms? At what point? At what point did we say it's not okay for a person to be a backyard blacksmith or a backyard weaponsmith? And then they're going to say, oh, well, there's this law from 20 years ago that says, from 20 years ago, you found, oh, hey, you know what? We appreciate that, brother. We appreciate that. You found us another law that needs to be struck down because it stands in stark violation of the history and traditions of the United States of America. Thank you for finding us this law, which needs to be struck down. Thank you for that. All right, guys, I got to go ahead and put a pin in it there because we do need to get on down the road. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. We love you, and we will see you on Monday. There's not going to be a deep dive tomorrow night because I'm going to be out of town with one of my kids, and we're just not going to be able to do it tomorrow night. So Monday morning we'll be back for the regular schedule, and we love you, and we'll see you then.